Why don't you begin, Jill?
Okay. My name's Jill Sebastian, and I'm an artist in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
And my name is Liz Bachhuber. I'm a Milwaukee native, but I am living and have been living in Germany, in Weimar and Berlin for 40 years.
Mm-hmm. So, and I'm not from Milwaukee, so there's, part of this exchange that's kind of fascinating is that Liz has gone back to the old country, and I've come to a city that I didn't grow up in. And the way it came together was Liz and I went to graduate school together 40 years ago.
Yes.
And yes, and about is it maybe 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, we visited. My husband and I visited Germany, and I had always wanted to catch up with Liz in Germany. That over these 40 years, now and then we'd have an hour coffee together, but it wasn't as though we were following one another's career very closely or communicating about art. But I had the good fortune to come right at the time that Liz had a 30-year retrospective of her work. And as I walked through, I realized how many things we were considering that were, similar questions we were considering, and that we had experiences that were both very different and some experiences that were very parallel.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I'd say that's true, that we had always remained friends or in a loose contact. Mm-hmm. And there was some exchange, especially through the university networks that we were both involved in. Mm-hmm. We had students of each other's that were visiting the other. Mm-hmm. At the Bauhaus University where I taught, and at MyEd where Jill taught. Right. So so Jill invited me then to participate in this project after Nirmal had spoken out her invitation to you. So,
and at first, I think one of the things that I was concerned about was the fact that we're both from two of the most prosperous countries, and technically, in terms of technical innovation, the most advanced countries on earth. What would we have to collaborate about? That it certainly wasn't by setting up a dialectic difference, but that there were other questions that had to do with global importance that we decided we would start to explore.
Right. Mm-hmm. We realized that both of us are very, like maybe the common theme or the common interest is the value of material. Mm-hmm. Be that also garbage, what other people consider garbage, we consider not garbage, and I've learned that too from the workings, from my travels, but also through, a certain awareness that I think all of us are finally having, that, that we're just producing too much waste with no plan really for how to deal with that.
And no personal responsibility.
Yeah.
And I think our collaboration is very much about working with our hands, working directly with material, being responsible for our footprint. And I think especially in the cultures that we're coming from, that there are big consumer cultures in which people just push away the consequences of their actions, and so becoming aware of that the work itself is called Eating Our Words, and it initially was initiated by a piece that Liz did with worm composting from her personal composting, and I had been making paper, going back to the most fundamental kinds of materials, but taking responsibility not to go to an art supply store, but to actually start from the very beginning. And so it was putting those two things together.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
And our communication is part of what's being, we have a worm box is kind of the center part of the kind of the wellspring of the collaboration, and the worms will be literally eating our words.
Right. And the worm soil, the compost that, or that rather, it is the kind of compost is almost a fertilizer that gets mixed with soil, and there'll be a planting in vessels that I'm building right now at the MyAd ceramic studio.
Yeah.
And there's a certain formal you have to see the work. I can't really talk about it. I don't want to talk about it right now, but there is an attempt to link up the form to the content of this whole enterprise and what we're doing. So.
And we were just talking about how during the pandemic, to be able to Zoom and collaborate that way, that I think we really are actually a kind of textbook example of how things have changed over the last 40 years, that we could not have collaborated in this way across the Atlantic Ocean had it not been for being able to Zoom and talk with one another. So in a sense, yes, it's rekindling a friendship and exploring ways in which our experiences are very similar and ways in which they're very different. But I think on that global question, I think we're living in a time that this is a project like this, and by the other artists in the show, that this is only the beginning of the potential for what can happen. Another thing we were talking about is in the time that we went to school, back when there were the first discussions of imagining the global village, and that old saying, which is think globally and act locally. What we realized is we could only go so far by talking over the internet, that Liz had to come here. And because we are makers with our hands, which is so primal and so essential, that but by the time you got here, we knew what we were doing. So
we did. We made some plans, some sketchy ones.
Yeah. And so then the compost will go into the pots, and we're growing peas, snow peas. And that's a very specific choice because paper, they will be made into paper. And paper is a material that is terribly invasive in terms of its impact on the environment. And I found from another project that I had done that you could use the whole plant, and that the paper is a very fine paper and a great alternative to paper being made out of trees. You don't think, as an artist, you go to the art supply store, you don't think what Arches watercolor paper, what it really takes to make that. There's a certain, again, as artists, lack of really understanding and responsibility for our impact. And so the plants will grow, and paper is, this week I'm making paper out of the ones we've already grown. And then that is cycled into takeaway pieces that, again, I'm not going to describe, but that so the whole project is a cycle.
In our separate lives, we've both been involved with Earth. It's like after a life of working with different material in different media, we've come down to gardening and composting. And at any rate, I think we both have a strategy of what we discovered, a strategy of sustainable working. And this is one of the things that led me, at any rate, to begin to compost it was 25 years worth of faculty meeting protocols that I composted together with my personal organic waste. That was a conceptual work for an exhibition that's led to both of us adding, we're collaborating also in that our words are, and our texts and our ideas and our drawings and our dreams are being composted by red wigglers in this kind of a reactor situation. So, and then this earth is going to be the soil that the snow peas are planted in. And Jill makes paper out of the snow peas that emerge from from our words. So the title "Eat Our Words," it, with all the implications of what that saying means. The worms are literally eating our words, but it's also like one has said something at one point in life, and life changes, so you end up eating your words. And so.
Yeah, and I think too, where collaboration is important is, both of us are artists that very often work alone for long stretches of time, not talking about it. And in fact, a lot of the time we're together, but we're not necessarily talking. We see our hands moving, and there's a simpatico that you don't have to speak to. But in terms of the conversations, the Zoom conversations have been very, very important to us, because it brings out, we happen to both be artists that are at a later stage in our art making. And so the questions that we have aren't questions that we can talk to other people about.
Really? Yeah.
And, how you sustain a life as an artist.
Right.
It's the sustainability of the manner you work, the material you work with, but it's also a matter of the habits that are in your life. So her worm box, and now my worm box, which I built after her design, that is going to be in the show, is where you go in and out of the house. And it's part of, stuff coming out of the studio and being recycled. And it's part of looking in and saying, here's another creature on Earth, these worms, which are, again, like making pots out of clay or making paper out of plants. It's very, very, they're one of the most fundamental other creatures you could possibly have. That I think that relates to us being from such countries that are so privileged in terms of the most advanced technologies, like Richard Serra having his steel rolled in Germany. Of course he'd have it rolled there. But we're going in the opposite direction, because we see I think, and Liz may speak to this too, that the consumerism and the kind of elitism and the kind of opportunism that is the art world, the big art fair world, the whole larger art fair, and our world isn't really about how you live your life. It's really about commerce, and it's about art as products and consuming. And I think we're working against that trend.
Yeah. It's about the cycles of nature and life. I mean, I think the things that we're doing, the idea that we're closer to death than younger artists. I mean, this certainly has something to do with thinking about the future, and what have we given, what can we give, what can we bring to the discussion.
Absolutely.
And it's the cycles of nature. Yeah.